Okay. It's Thursday, 16th July 2020. Thank you for keeping it OMN. My name is Asli Galgalo. The disconnect between the government and the people is evident from the comments of the core of Oromo institution, that is the Gather Oromo elites, youth, to the farmer and herder in the village. The force the government is using to contain the situation is worsening it. The assassination of the beloved Oromo artist Hachalu Hundessa, the murder of over 200 people who were mourning him, and the arrest of thousands, including top Oromo opposition leaders, pierced the heart of the Oromo nation. Many are seeing this as a well-planned strategy by the government to tighten their grip over the nation and stay in power without conducting free and fair election. On June 30th, the government declared the murderers of Hachalu were external forces who were trying to shift focus from the GAD talks which were going on at the United Nations Security Council at the time of his murder. They cracked down on different opposition leaders, journalists, raided the OMN offices and closed the Finfinia office. Now the Attorney General has linked the case to the Oromo Liberation Army, which they call Shane. They say the murderers were commissioned by the Shane group. Yet, the evidence they're presenting is not to a trial before a court of law. Rather, they're using state media to convince people that the murder was orchestrated by the group. However, the critics and activists of the government are saying the murder was pre-planned by the government, of course, with the aim of silencing the opposition and illegally staying in power. Joining me now to shed light on the emerging issues is Segaya Arasa, a Melbourne-based legal scholar who specializes in Ethiopia's constitutional law, federalism, and human rights law. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Asli. Thanks for having me.
So the first question, even before we go to what is currently happening in the country, is we've had worldwide protests, especially in the diaspora. And one of the main slogans that has been trending is respect my existence or expect my resistance. What is this about?
Well, that is basically an extension of the widely held protest in Oromia, protesting against the assassination, the arbitrary and brutal assassination of Hachalu Hundessa, and the crackdown upon Oromo political leaders, activists, journalists, and the OMN. People have been protesting at home on through various mechanisms, but this one was organized by the global Oromo diaspora communities and the young men and women who are born and raised in the diaspora communities in North America, in Australia, and in Europe have come up with a hashtag Oromo protest movement on social media. And they have been doing lots of activities, such as producing small snippets, video snippets, where they speak about how they are Oromo and they protest the assassination as well as the crackdown on the political act that speak for and represent the Oromo people in Ethiopia. They basically came up with this idea, which now you just said, in which they say, respect my existence or expect resistance. The reason they are basically framing it in this way is because the attack on Hachalu Hundessa and the subsequent attack on Jawar Mohammed, arrest of Jawar Mohammed, arrest of Bekele Garba, arrest of many prominent political leaders of the OLF, and the raid on the OMN Finfinne office, and the arrest of all the journalists and the staff, and then the attempt on the part of the Prime Minister to crack down on all activists or on all Oromo resistant forces, to put them in the line, really, to basically subdue them. That kind of statement has made people outraged, has made people very, very angry. And it is the expression of that anger. And at this point in time, Oromos feel like the Ethiopian government has waged a war on them. The activities that have been unfolding immediately after the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa is an act of provocation. It's a provocation to see the government as the enemy. It is an act of bringing out the outrage, the frustration of the people. And so, as a result of that provocation, people have been out on the streets, demonstrating, and sometimes even destroying political party offices, the party offices of the Prosperity Party, which is the party of Abiy Ahmed, government institutions, various other sites have been destroyed. And now this young people from the diaspora, the Keros and Karres of North America, Europe, and Australia are saying, look, don't complain to me about the destruction of properties and offices and so on and so forth, because if you don't respect me, then you would only expect this resistance. And
yeah, thank you. And the thing that amazes people is that the Prime Minister keeps justifying his being an Oromo. There was an interview aired by OBN last night, and he said he's Oromo. He kept justifying him being Oromo. He said, my mom is Oromo, my dad is Oromo, I was born in Oromia. You know, he doesn't understand why people keep labeling him. Why does he keep justifying himself? Why is there this, crisis of background? Why is it even important, him being an Oromo?
Yeah. The first is because this is a narcissistic prime minister whose focus is only on himself, on his image, on his identity, on who he is. And he's constantly on a PR effort, campaign virtually. And one of the reasons keeps going back to who he is, his identity, where he comes from, is an attempt to satisfy his narcissistic, insatiable narcissistic tendencies. However, it's also an indication of how desperate he is, how defensive now is about the criticism leveled against him over time. Now, by the way, this television interview that you just saw in Afan to OBN, Oromia Broadcasting News Network, has been recorded about 2 weeks ago, just before Hachalu was died. It wasn't transmitted for so long because of the incident and what unfolded after that. And at the time they recorded it, there was a widespread criticism against him, saying that he has betrayed the Oromo cause. After riding on the Oromo protest movement to get into office, he has simply, at first, neglected, then and then he started to actively work against the demands of the Oromo protest movement of the 2015 to 2018 times. And he has failed to address the Oromo questions. And in fact, he has displaced the Oromo demands with other political agenda. And he is basically pushing the issue to the side and playing into the historical trajectory in which Oromos are continuously marginalized from the political space in Ethiopia. Now, there was a lot of part of the criticism is that he has betrayed the Oromo, he has ignored the Oromo demands. He has simply acted like the historical rivals of the Oromo nation. He is against the demands of Oromo nationalism, resurgent Oromo nationalism that have led to the Oromo protest movement. He, in some corners, given the fact that he is basically, in everything he says, in all the statements, in all the decisions, in all the laws that legal measures he takes, because he is railing against the Oromo interests. People are saying, forget it. His party is not an Oromo party. He is not an Oromo party. He's not an Oromo person. I mean, in terms of not biologically and not, where he's come from, where he's born from. No, but his political alliance is not with the Oromo public, with the demands of the Oromo. And in fact, it's a very rare situation. It's a very rare situations that he actually gives interviews in Afan Oromo and to an Oromo media. And it's very rarely that he even mentions the Oromo issues in any public sense. Now, it's very interesting. Even after the Hachalu's days, many officials have sent a video recorded message of condolence to the family and a way of saying farewell to Hachalu, not the prime minister. He always distanced himself from Oromo issues, Oromo problems. So because of this, he was about to come back to counteract to that criticism. And he was saying, look, I am born from an Oromo mother, an Oromo father, I'm to a farmer's family, and so on and so forth, trying to show how humble his background is and so forth. Where he is born, who he is born from, where he comes, not important really. What he stands for, how he addresses the group that he represents, because he actually comes from the Oromo People's Democratic Organization, which is the OPIDIO. But then he basically acts completely against whatever that organization used to stand for. The consequence is that people said, this is not an Oromo guy. He is part of the others who historically have been in the business of, as a government, in the business of marginalizing, oppressing, and displacing the Oromo. So that criticism was really getting into him. And he was trying to counteract that criticism, that he actually came out on the media and tried to assert that he is an Oromo pure. However, we also know that there is some falsification of his prior assertions about his identity. At the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony.
For the people who've not, or the audience who've not seen this video or had him talk about it, or for non-Oromo speakers, we'll just play a translated version of it. And people are saying there's this inconsistency that the Prime Minister keeps saying. He says this thing, the next minute he's saying another thing, and people don't even know what to believe anymore. It's not about his identity or identity crisis. So if my director could just bring up the video of him being introduced in Norway when he was receiving the Nobel Prize, and last night's video.
You were born into a traditional family of simple means, to a mother who was an Amara Orthodox Christian, and to a father who was an Oromo Muslim. Diversity seems to be in your origin. As an adult, you had a long military...
Hata umale dalonni ko dachi Oromiyaa keessa abbaa faati ko Oromoodha. Oromoo duwwaa osoo hin taane qonnaan bultoota baadiyyaa keessatti dhaladhee.
Yeah, that's the video. So what's with this
Yes.
inconsistency?
Well, it's his way of, again, as I said, trying to appeal to the Oromo public once again. There is a widespread rumor that the first is there is the Oromo discontent, the Oromo feeling that they are betrayed by him, that he is ignored cause, that he literally is actually becoming an enemy. He is trying to bring back the systems and the regimes that in the past had been very much against the Oromo national pride, the Oromo national identity, the Oromo national demand for determination. Now, because he is, his politics is generally, citizen-based politics, he calls it, in his Prosperity Party. His politics is basically a rejection of the national right to self-determination and the collective rights of groups in Ethiopia, national groups, to autonomy, self-rule, and expression of identity, enjoyment of culture, and so on and so forth. Because he thinks that is not important. Individual rights are important, and individual citizen politics is important, more important. Really, that's the only proper politics, and so on and so forth. That was a move away, a drift away from the multinational federal setup that the country has put down in the constitution that it is ruled under for the last 29 years. Now, people are saying this guy is against federalism. This guy is ennobling imperial kings such as Menelik, Haile Selassie, so on and so forth. And his own political advisor, his own advisor in the Prime Minister's office, Daniel Kibret, has once said here in public that Abiy Ahmed represents the opportunity for Ethiopia to continue the nation-building project of Emperor Menelik and Haile Selassie. And when people hear these things, and when everything that he does is basically something that does not go in line with the sensibilities, the political sensibilities, and the pains and troubles that Oromos have lived, when he is not really come into terms with it, and he's not reflecting that, people are saying this guy is not an Oromo. And then, of course, there are rumors that come out and saying, of course, his mom is an Amhara, of course, his wife is an Amhara. He's working from that script to attack us now, and so on and so forth. But that really is not important. The more important thing is who he is. It doesn't matter what family he comes from. The more important thing to the Oromo public, the source of their disaffection, is not whether he is an Amhara or an Oromo or this or that. The source of their disaffection is that they are ignored, their cause is marginalized, their interests, their demands are left unaddressed, and in fact, their questions, their political questions, are simply displaced by other irrelevant questions, and probably questions that are inimical to the national interests of the Oromos. So he is trying to respond to that criticism, which says you have veered away, you have gone away from what the Oromo are demanding. You are becoming a political liability. You are becoming an irrelevance to the Oromo politics. So that was the idea. In fact, people are saying he's promoting an Aftanya politics, you know?
To the questions that the Oromos have been asking, there's a lot of questions the Oromos are asking. They've been asking for decades. Yeah. And part of this question is for Afan Oromo, which is the widely spoken language in Ethiopia, to be made federal language. Again, from the interview that was aired last night, the Prime Minister said that will have to wait for 10 or 20 years. So should we expect such a statement from him at such a time?
It's a very sad thing, you know. It's a bit insensitive, although he did this as a public relations work to appeal to the Oromo public. He fails disastrously again, and he failed because at least this is a very important issue to the Oromo. At least for political purposes, he should have actually said, yes, this is a matter of constitutional amendment. If I were in his position, that's what I. Even if I don't want that to happen, you know. But the easy thing is, this is a multinational country. The Amharic is only the working language of the country, and we know that the cohorts of politicians that are around him are trying to convert Amharic from a working language into a national language. And in fact, Abiy Ahmed himself has been saying that Amharic has to be given from primary, from the grade 1 rather than from grade 5 after people have started through their mother tongue, and so on and so forth. We know his position in this regard, that he is very part of the Amharic language as opposed to other languages, including the Afan Oromo. And we know that the Afan Oromo issue makes him very, very uncomfortable, especially in the eyes of his Amhara fan base, okay? And because of this, we know where he stands. But at least politically, if he is here to appeal to the Oromo public, one of the things that are very sensitive and one of the things that are very important to the Oromo is Afan Oromo. And this have been articulated in the course of the protest movement. And there was this hope that now that Opidio is the upper hand in the EPRDF, somehow they would at least address the issue properly and bring it to the debate, to the constitutional debate. So according to the constitution, Amharic is the working language. All other languages are equal, and they have equal status in the country, and regions can have their own working languages, and local nations, nationalities, all of them have the right to language, and they can use them for education, for administration, for judicial purposes, and so on and so forth. But one thing was lacking, that the nation has acknowledged its multinational nature, but it hasn't acknowledged the fact that the government, the federal government, should also be multilingual. So what it did was, it recognized that this is a country of many languages, but it didn't recognize that the government should speak in many languages. It chose one language, and one language that is implicated in the linguistic injustice that reigned in the country, i.e. the hierarchical relationship among languages. Amharic has been from imperial times on the language of the government. In fact, there was a whole lot of attempt to make it a national language at the expense of the other language. The fact that Amharic remains to be the working language is undiscussed, unnegotiated. It was just there, imposed as a relic of the past. And the fact that we have now stopped an empire and become a federal state, in fact, a multinational federal state, hasn't changed any bit of that linguistic hierarchy in the country, linguistic injustice in it. The result is that many people, the Tigrayans, are asking for it, for a change, and for having more languages to be the working language of the federal government, because it cuts off a number of people out of the system in the federal government. Job opportunities are lost. Many other opportunities are lost. So, language is a social capital. And it's also a way of making the language a federal working language. Means it's a way of empowering the language and equalizing the language, bridging the gap between the different languages in that country. So it is a question of linguistic justice. It's not just a matter of national pride for Oromos. In fact, I would go for, given the fact that all languages have equal official status, that is the constitutional clause, by the way, article. If that is the case, there is no prohibition, there is no need to be so exercised, agitated by the fact that one group or other is asking for making one language, their language, a federal working language. So if I were in his position, what I would do is, it's a good question, it's a legitimate question. There is a constitutional room for it, but of course, we need to do something about how we can change that article which says the working language of Ethiopia, the federal government, Amharic. So we can do that, we can pursue that through civil politics, through amendment and constitutional amendment. That would be enough for the Oromo public. They needed only reassurance. And he actually defied that, he failed to give that reassurance and made the Oromos more frustrated. And in fact, he's playing into his fan base again, the fan base being the Amhara public. So that was unfortunate, very unfortunate, even as a public relations exercise.
Another important thing to note from last night's interview that was aired on OBN was his response to, the Prime Minister keeps using this word jealousy. Every time he's asked why the Oromos are dissatisfied with his leadership, he keeps saying, they're jealous of me. Na inafan, inafa is jealousy in Oromo. And this is so hard to describe coming from someone who came to power on the backs of the Oromo people. As someone who speaks for the Oromo, as an Oromo person, are you jealous of the Prime Minister?
Of all people, of him, of all people, me. I mean, that's really surprising. And first and foremost, jealousy doesn't have to have any place in politics, first and foremost. It's not about personal rivalry. That we criticize him is because he is not delivering on the promises that they have made, that he has made, that his government has made, that his party has made. Oromos, why would any Oromo be particularly jealous of him? And what is there to be jealous of him anyway? Is it the fact that he is presiding over a very beleaguered country that is 2/3 of which is really under military rule at the moment? Is it that he is presiding over a country that is one of the poorest? a country that is whose displaced population, whose internally displaced population are #1 in the world, what is there to be jealous of, really? Is it his absolutely inept political competence? What is it that anyone will be jealous of? And even if people are individually, personally jealous, what to do with how he does politics, and why would he mention jealousy as a reason for his lack of popularity? You know, if people are jealous, they will be jealous anyway, no matter what he does. But he is unpopular, not because of jealousy. I mean, 40 million people of Oromos, over 40 million, or 112 million people in that country. I don't think people hate him because of jealousy. I don't think there is anything to be jealous of him about. I think they hate him. They don't like him, at least. And they hated him. They liked him at the beginning, by the way. You know, our overwhelming support that he enjoyed during the first 6 months. And they started to, he lost that, and they started to be first disaffected from him. And now people hate him, not because they are jealous, but because he failed to deliver. And I don't think, again, making mention of jealousy as a factor for the dislike, the disrepute he has fallen into, is another indication that this person is very, very narcissistic. And you can't say anything more than that. In fact, Inafa is not, it's very alien to an Oromo culture, by the way. Let alone at a person who has achieved the highest office, the status of being the chief executive of a big country. You can't be jealous of your own peers. That's a kind of a taboo in Oromo. Yeah. We don't even have that concept, and I don't know why he raised it, but I think, as I said earlier on, there is this narcissistic streak in him, and I think he is just saying, I'm so good that people are jealous of me and that they dislike me. And what he doesn't realize that he's not.
So another thing that has been trending is this letter that the Prime Minister wrote to the international community after Charles' death. He describes, or rather he writes about his achievements and how people are trying to discredit him, or rather portraying him in bad light. So if my director can just bring up the letter on screen for people to see, that's the conclusion. That is him writing to the international community. So he talks about how he's achieved a lot and people just don't want to give him that, you know, benefit. Rather than trying to say how he is bad, how he's not fulfilling the things that he should be, how he's not the leader that he's supposed to be. So what's your take on that? Or rather, why does this Prime Minister keep justifying himself?
You raised a very interesting letter. This letter was sent as a press release to the international community, to the embassies in Ethiopia, and I was made privy to it only yesterday. And it's a 6-page letter in which he tries to highlight, he says, I'm giving you the context, the background, and what has unfolded since Hachalu's assassination. And he at first says that they are sorry and they will leave no stone no stone unturned to find out the criminals and to make sure that justice is rendered. And then he goes on to say again this, he indulges himself into the PR work that we just said. He also manifested in the interview, and the OBN interview. And one of the things he does in that letter is responding to the domestic criticism. And he identifies 4 major issues, 4 major criticisms, and says that he has been portrayed wrongly. He says he's been portrayed as someone who is against the multinational federal setup, as a proponent of a unitary, centralized unitary regime. He is seeking to bring back the unitary system that was here before 1991. The second criticism he tries to address himself to is that he is viewed as Naftenya, that his regime is Naftanya regime, and he says that that is wrong, and I think he is very much hurt by that criticism. He very much in defense of the person of the prime minister. You know, as a legal scholar, I remember reading the Ethiopian Penal Code of 1957. The 1957 Penal Code has a section dealing with offenses against the state, and one of the first offense in that paragraph, in that area, is offenses against the person of the emperor. And when I was reading this letter, I said, you know, I'm called Naftanya when I can't be, because I'm an Oromo, you know. And Naftanya is mostly portrayed in this media outlets now as an Amhara, but that's not the case. There were Oromo Naftanyas, there were Ugrage Naftanyas, there were Tigrayan Naftanyas, and so on and so forth. That is wrong. But I, of all people, me, the Oromo, is being called Naftanya, and that's wrong, and that's a deliberate misrepresentation and character assassination that is put up, attributed to me, he seems to say. But one of the reasons people are saying that him is a Naftanya regime is the Naftanya is basically the settler colonial leaders of the late 19th century and early 20th century, who actually subjugated the southern half of Ethiopia and incorporated it into the Ethiopian empire. So one of the things that happened in those days was that the imperials will go south, will occupy the land, will conquer the people, subdue them, and own both the land and the people. It's called the Naftanya Gabbar system. That system is very much rejected and rebuked. It is anathema to the Oromo public and the other nations and nationalities and peoples region, and all the wider south, as I call them, the wider south in Ethiopia, the peripheral peoples. And the sentiment, the political sentiment that comes out from the Prime Minister's office, from his statements, from his political postures, from his legislative and policy measures, from his organization of structures, I mean, the formation of different commissions and so on and so forth. What you see there is kind of a restoration of the old system, at least with a lot of sympathy. There is a gesture of sympathy towards the old system. And so the Oromos, this is a restoration of the Naftanya system. This is a restoration of the unitary system. This is a restoration of the imperial system, and so on and so forth. It is again because of his own activities, decisions, policies, statements that people are saying, this is a Naftanya system. However, now he tries to counteract it by saying, look, Naftanya is not even about blood, it's about system. Precisely. But then he says, how do you call me Naftanya? And when I read that, really, it looks like he's trying to defend his person. And that reminded me of how Haile Selassie was trying to defend his person by a criminal code in the Imperial Penal Code of 1950. We're dedicating a section which basically penalizes any criticism, any bad fouling of the name, the dignity of the emperor and the imperial family. And the title of that section is Offense Against the Emperor. And in the defense that now Abiy made in this letter, he actually tried to defend the person of Abiy Ahmed, the person of the prime minister. That's again pathetic. The third criticism he tries to respond to is that he has allies, he has appointees in his office who are lurking behind him, he says. These are the words used in the letter, lurking behind him to influence him and shape him in such a way that he betrays, he drifts away from the Oromo cause. He distances himself from the Oromo cause. And these are used, most of them are from Amhara political elite, the political class, who are around him, both as appointees, as advisors, as counselors, and also as party buddies, you know, the similar parties that promote the same kind of politics and ideology with his party. And he says they are basically misrepresenting my office, the government's office, by saying that there are other people around me who are promoting the supremacy of one group over the other. And the reason is because there is a particular advisor. His name is Deacon Daniel Kibret. He's an Orthodox deacon. He was in the priesthood. He has a particular position in the priesthood of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. His allegiance is obvious. He's a preacher. He writes on a magazine, on a weekly for a long time. He's basically a preacher. And when he does preach, his Islamophobia is out there. His Oromophobia is out there. Lots of videos are there. And recently he made a TV interview, and he said, one of the things he said, and that offends people, especially the wider South, the people of Oromo and the wider South. One of the things he said is that Abiy Ahmed is a moment. Abiy Ahmed is our moment. Abiy Ahmed is the expression, the opportunity for us to continue and complete the nation building, the empire building project of emperors like Menelik and Haile Selassie. And people are saying it is him who runs the government. It is the Neftanya who run the government because of these things. Now he says there is this kind of criticism, when in actual fact, we do not, he says, my party, I do not accept the supremacy of any group over the other. We do not make any discrimination among people. We believe we believe in equality and so on and so forth. And everything that they said is simply a rumor. And the fourth comment, criticism he has been trying to address himself to, if I may look back to my notes. Yes, sure. He is criticized. He says, I am criticized as someone, I am misrepresented as someone who has betrayed the Oromo cause, who has ignored the Oromo cause. And he actually says that I didn't, but he doesn't substantiate it in the letter, as you can see. He doesn't say how he is for the Oromo cause. He doesn't. And even when he says that I am criticized for this, he doesn't show how his political posture is in line with, in accordance with the Oromo demands or the Oromo national interests and so on and so forth.
The letter is basically
and so he just
cleansing himself of all the allegations that are being put against him and blaming other people in his government for actually driving him, or rather drifting him from the Oromo cause, or rather focusing on the Oromo issue.
Absolutely. In fact, the letter is generally trying to do whitewashing. And the unfortunate thing about that letter is all these explanations should have been made to the Oromo public. All these explanations should have been given to the Ethiopian public through a press conference, journalists asking questions. All these rumors should have been dispelled. All these rumors emerging from disaffections should have been dispelled in a domestic platform where journalists are asked questions, where he can even give an exclusive interview to a particular media outlet, or he can even go to the parliament and addresses this in a question session. You know, people ask these questions and how do you react to it, etc. He should have done that, and he didn't. Instead, he went out. He wrote a secret letter in the name of press release, and unusually for him, he puts everything on his Facebook page, both the Prime Minister's office and Abiy Ahmed Ali's page, and so on and so forth. Uncharacteristically, this one isn't there, and it is only through diplomatic groups that we get to see this. You know how you got it, and I know how I got it. We are privy to this because of particular network of connections and friends. And the reason he did this is he didn't care to explain himself to the Ethiopian public. What does that tell me? For me, he has really reached the point where he is desperately begging for an understanding. He thinks that the Oromo public has rejected him, the Ethiopian public have rejected him. Now he's rejected unfairly, and he wants to be understood. He wants to explain himself, and he wants to be understood, especially among people in the international community. The reason is because his international reputation is important for him, because he just won a Nobel Peace Prize, not even a year ago now. You know, it hasn't been a year since he has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So his reputation is important in the eyes of the international community. He has to protect it by saying, look, I am misunderstood. I am a victim of misrepresentation. I am a victim of orchestrated media attempt to put my government in bad light, but I'm very good. I am competent. I have achieved quite a lot. I have done the reform. I have released prisoners. I have, all sorts of things. But in actual fact, he hasn't done all those things. He was the hope. He was the promise. But that hope was dashed, and that promise remains to be undelivered.
Over to Achalu.
Yeah.
Killed Achalu. They said they had information. They seemed to know. They didn't say they knew. They said they seemed to know the assassins of Achalu. They even asserted that they knew the motives behind his murder. That is before police investigation. So did they have information that he would be killed? And if they did, why do you think he was not protected?
Yes, they had information that he would be killed. In fact, the Prime Minister had revealed this way before Achalu was assassinated, that he would be killed, and that a particular group would kill him. He didn't name specifically, but he says, they will kill him. You will see. He said this to the group of elders that were mediating between him and the Tigrayan political leaders in Mekelle. There was a group of elders who were trying to mediate between him, his party, and the political party that is governing Tigray in Mekelle, because there is a huge rift and there is a lot of push and pull between them, especially after the election has been postponed, and Tigray wanted to continue to have its own election. There is a huge tension there, and he comes out and vows that he will take action. The National Electoral Board chair said that any other election that are conducted in this time, when we have postponed it, is illegal without my recognition, and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of confrontation between the federal government on the one hand and the Tigrayan government, as a result of which he wanted to have somehow a peaceful settlement of a kind of negotiation with the Tigrayan leadership. And he brought together a group of elders, Shimagiles, as they are called in Amharic, composed of notable people, including Haile Gebrselassie, the athlete, Pastor Daniel Gebrselassie, the chair, a person who was responsible for also mediating the release of the CUD political prisoners in 2007, 2008, after the post-election crisis. You remember, the high-level political opposition leaders were in prison, and these elders negotiated their release, they say, their pardon, and so on. In the same manner, he put together this group of elders. I think included in it was a couple of Abagadas. They were sent to Mekelle. They went there, and the Mekelle being the capital city of the Tigrayan region, and they went there and they discussed, and the Tigrayan political leadership said, yes, it's high time that we started a national dialogue. It's not just only with us, but there are a number of people who are disaffected with Abiy's Prosperity Party and the way the country is run. And first of all, it's really now late, but it should have happened long ago, and we've been calling for it, and nobody responded. But when it happens, it has to happen, not just with us, but with other groups, nations and nationalities and peoples of Ethiopia who have the same disaffections like we do, the same suspicions about the federal arrangement, the same suspicions about the government's views of the constitution, and so on and so forth. So we're happy that you have come, but we want a broader national dialogue, not just with us, but with all other political forces. And so the elders came back. They debriefed Abiy, and he was about to send them again for a round of discussion, mediation with the Tigrayan political leadership. It is at that point in time, and all journalists have been saying this a number of times in Amharic. Journalists can go and ask those group of elders about how he said it, and they were kind of shocked actually at hearing that. And this is what he said: they are going to now expect a very dramatic thing to happen. They are going to kill Hachalu, by the way, he said, and they will kill him. And people didn't know. And at this point in time, Hachalu hasn't even given that interview to OMN. And Hachalu wasn't even killed. And then when he was killed, if you look at, there were about 10 media events, 10 releases from the Prime Minister, himself, from the president of the Oromia National Regional Estate, Shimelis Abdisa, from the city mayor, Engineer Takele Uma, from the Attorney General, from 3 police commissioners, Oromia Police Commission, Federal Police Commission, the city's police commissioners, and the Prime Minister in Parliament, the Prime Minister Cabinet. So there were a number of times when they uttered their views about who killed him and why he was killed. And the very moment at which Hachalu was assassinated, way before his burial, way before the arrest of Jawar and Bakala happened, the Prime Minister came out and said that Egypt, TPLF and OLF are the ones who have caused this to destabilize us and to distract us from our focus, our main focus, which is the issue of the Nile Dam, okay, the Renaissance Dam. And people said, how did he know? How did he know that these forces are behind it? How did he know that they have any interest? How is Hachalu related to all these forces anyway? Those were the first point at which people were saying, did he know? How come? You know? So, and that's also the point at which we always say, we have been saying that until it is properly investigated and cleared, the government is presumed to be the sponsor of the assassination of Hachalu. And they are not doing anything to clear that doubt, to clear everything points towards them, and they are not deflecting that evidence pointing towards them, and they are not doing a very serious forensic investigation by a professional body overseen by a neutral political body, and it is already showing that they are implicated in the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa. Now,
still, okay.
That's not, yeah, go ahead.
Still on his assassination, there was allegation that there's this lady identified as Lamrot Kamal who was allegedly in the car with Hachalu at the time of his murder. This lady is also alleged to be part of the Republic Guard, which is who are the bodyguards of Abiy. Why is it so difficult, or rather, why is the government very reluctant when it comes to investigating her or even mentioning her in relation to the case?
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns in relation to this now. One of the reasons is that the way they have tried to point fingers at the culprits when they haven't really arrested the people who have actually committed the crime, they haven't really done an on-site gathering of information. We haven't even, we haven't had an autopsy report yet. And people say that the body of Hachalu is buried without even the bullet being plucked out of his flesh, so that we can know what kind of where it came from, etc. There is no medical report, there is no autopsy. And the most interesting thing is that the person who was said to be in the car with him, Lamrot Kamal, is not investigated, she's not apprehended, nobody knows where she is at this point in time. And she is a very close family acquaintance, by the way. She's a close friend to him and to his wife. And now nobody knows where she is. And how is it that you can conduct, and mind you, she is the person who called others for help at the time of the attack, because he didn't die automatically, he died in the hospital later on. And there were people who came, and we're not clear about who they are, although we have heard who was there and who wasn't. But the government is not pointing that out yet. And there was she's the one who called these people. And the very curious thing is, why is it that A, she's not apprehended, B, she's not even investigated, we haven't heard from her, interviewed. We don't know where her whereabouts. Everything is murky there. And this is one of the problems. A second thing is that there is this attempt to say that OLF is behind this, OLF Shane in particular. And that's, I suppose, why they have arrested the political leadership in the city. And of course, the Oromo Liberation Army, that's that part that haven't come to the peaceful political process alongside Jal Daud. That group, now led by a guy called Marro, that group has always been at war with the regime. So they're trying, I don't think they are trying to implicate him when they are saying OLF Shane has done this. They are basically implicating the peaceful political group in Finfinne in the commission of the crime. And that's why they went after the political leadership of OLF in Finfinne. They said this. Later on, they said Jawar and Bekele are also remotely associated with this. In fact, they have spread their cadres to go into Oromia and to gather people and convince people that Jawar and Bekele are behind this. And they knew that this is going to happen. They protracted such a way to create an occasion for them to be able to create a riot and dislodge the government and basically remove the government from office. And this is the kind of ploy they're projecting. Now, they've also said all sorts of things. Jawar and Bekele are arrested because they were hijacking the body of Hachalu against the will of the family, and they brought the body to the Prosperity Party's office compound. Now it's very interesting that Jawar and Bekele wanted to hijack the Prosperity Party's office. What do you mean by hijacking and then bringing it to the government's office? And this doesn't make sense. They have been saying this, and even in this letter we just discussed, this letter that was released to the diplomatic community, one of the things that it says is that they have apprehended about 35 people, and these people are arrested, some of them because they were having guns and they were implicated in the crime. Some of them have been arrested because they were in the business of hijacking the body of Hachalu, and some of them because they were doing things that are against the constitutional order. And if anyone is doing anything about the constitutional order, and why do you have to use the occasion of Hachalu's assassination to go after them? What were you doing before? It has nothing to do with ordinary criminal investigation. Now, we know that this is a high-profile assassination. We know that it is a political assassination. But even if it is an ordinary crime of ordinary person, completely anonymous, this is not the way you go about criminal investigation. And instead, they come out on TV and on television, they create this spectacle of pointing fingers, this TV spectacle of pointing fingers and conducting a trial on TV and saying that these are the people who are criminals. This is what they did. And they are producing documentary movies also. And by the way, some of the comments the Attorney General did in relation to the perpetrators, they said, and what they said, she says, that a couple of people came and convinced the actual shooter, persuaded him, they are OLF, persuaded him in Amharic, but among themselves they were speaking in Tigrinya. And so Tigrinya speaking OLF people, okay, convinced an Amhara boy whose political allegiance relates to more the centrist groups like Izema, okay, and he was persuaded to shoot the guy. And then there was a blunder about his name. The Attorney General doesn't even know how to name him properly. At some point she said he's called
wrong names.
Yeah, at some point she said he's called Tlahun Yami. Then she calls him Tlaye Yawami. And then she calls him Tlaye Yami.
She was being corrected from behind the camera. It was audible.
And then we find out now that the guy, that boy who was presented as Tlahun Yami, his name is actually Alabacho Truna. we know where his locality is. He's a guy from Finfinne in the Faransai Legation area. Faransai Legation being the village, the suburb around the French embassy in Sidiskilo. And he is basically an ordinary chap who is a big fan and a choir leader, really, of the one of the famous football teams, Ethiopian Coffee. He leads the chant in the stadium in support of his team. That's how innocent he is. He's not a political fellow. And when he is politically associated, he's associated with people like Andargacho Tsege, the leader of the Gimbot Sabat in the past, now the Ethiopian Citizenship whatever party, Ethiopian Izema, it is called in Amharic. I don't know how to translate the acronym there. So he is associated with that group. He is, of course, one of the victims of homophobia, like many people who are raised and live in Finfinne. But the guy is, I don't think, is the one who perpetrated it. They are basically using him as an alibi. They present him as a criminal. And then once the trial starts, there will obviously be no evidence connecting him. And then he will be free. Even if he's not free, they will find a way to get him out of the country. And he is paid to perform this role. So this is what actually exists. But now, the narration that is coming from the government is basically saying an Oromo, an OLF as an organization, an Oromo person killed.
An Oromo
That's why they insist on Tlahun Yami. Yeah. Tlahun Yami, Tlahun Wami, etc. What they insist this artificial name is because they want to say an Oromo killed an Oromo. An Oromo killed Achalu. And the government is after them. And this is something that the government is not implicated in.
Still on his murder, and the government trying, or rather the Attorney General's office trying to implicate someone of Achalu's murder. Is this drama about Achalu's interview with OMN that has been trending the whole week? The government is saying the interview was cut, and they replayed the interview, a translated version of the interview on TV, and they were trying to look for a statement or where Achalu said he was being threatened by Shane, but there's nothing like that, obviously. Our journalist, Guyo Wario, who did the interview, clearly asserted that Achalu never mentioned Shane in his interview, and the parts that were cut it was nothing of the interest to the audience, so it was just cut to make sure the minute was a 35. That is the segment he has. It is 35-minute interview, and he had to deliver that. So what is this all about? Why is OMN being framed for cutting the interview, or rather trying to protect the Shane that Achalu allegedly mentioned in the interview?
Yeah, the reason is they have also now, they have raided the OMN office, they have arrested the journalists, and they have been saying that the OMN and Jawar are behind all this. They want to implicate them. So they are preparing a charge for them and implicating him in the killing of Achalu, in a conspiracy of assassinating Achalu. And they are basically trying to, so according to the government, the OMN, by cutting out those areas, those sections of the interview in which he blames or he fears the Shani, the OLF Shani, so that they can really go on and conduct this assassination and cause a reason for protest. Okay, so that's the kind of narrative that's coming from the government. However, we have listened to the interview of Achalu, both the original version that was aired by OMN and the one that the general now said that the OMN unfairly excluded. And we listened to it. And what he says there is that Guyowario asks him, so are you threatened by anyone? Said, no, who threatens me? That's how he reacts.
Yeah.
How he carries himself. No, who threatens me? But there are people from Kellam, from the 4 zones of Wallata, who actually said that I have to go way out of this country. That you don't know who would kill you.
Yeah, they're afraid.
We want you. We need you. We don't want to lose you. And there could be people who will kill you. And please be safe. If you can't get out of this country. That kind of advice I have received. And that is because people care for me. Otherwise, there was no one who threatens me. That was one. Then there was another interview that also tried to bring in, where Hachalu and other people gave interview, other artists gave interview to another television program, another television, OBS, Oromo Broadcasting Service. Okay, yes. And after he made a statement there, which was critical of all Oromo parties, including the the OLF, someone has threatened him by calling on his phone. And by the way, it's very interesting that the Attorney General said before he was dead, we knew that there were threats on him, and so on and so forth. Now, if they knew that there were threats on him and they didn't protect him, then that's their fault, by the way. But secondly, why do they wait until he is assassinated to use that evidence to frame the, to charge the person who has assassinated him? That was sad. At any rate, they used the OBS interview, and then a threat that came in response to that interview, and they said this is what it is. Now, and this is the Shani thing that is trying to assassinate, to threaten Hachalu. Now, there came another evidence now. There was a guy who came out and said, that voice is mine.
Yeah, we have the video as well.
Yes, he said, that voice is mine. I was threatening, actually, a Prosperity Party's appointee. His name is Taye Denda, another Oromo regional government official. Yeah. Who is also an attorney general, I think an attorney general of Oromia, I guess. And he's very much in charge of the Oromia Prosperity Party. And he's very vocal on social media, criticizing anything and everything except Abiy Ahmed. And when he goes really nasty in his criticisms on social media, on criticism of all other political parties. And sometimes he infuriates people. And this boy now says, I called Taye Denda and threatened him with that voice message. It is that voice message now they're putting out on TV to say that an OLF member is threatening Hachalu Hundessa and thereby following up that threat with an assassination act. Now, that is an absolute fiasco. That's absolutely tragic. They shouldn't have gone this far. Now, why do I say this? Even if these bits and pieces of evidence they are presenting are correct, okay? The place and the venue at which these evidences are to be presented is the courtroom, not on TV. And my question is, why are they doing this television spectacle? They're doing it to stage a political, to basically say that there are our opponents, there are political parties that we want to do away with by using this opportunity, this occasion, as an occasion which helps us to have a free hand to harass and arrest and criminalize the OLF and whatever opponents they have. So that's why they're doing it on the media. Otherwise, the trial should have happened in court after investigation, and all these evidences might be accepted or not accepted in court, and that's where you try the whole criminality.
Yeah, you've actually touched on a topic I was heading to. I wanted to ask, why is it important for the government, to rule on this case? Yet it's the mandate of the court to actually tell us whether this information is true or not, and who to cross-examine. So why is it important for them to actually rule on this case? It's not the case at all, and it's not their mandate. So from how they're reacting to this case and the statements they've been giving since the internet shut down, do we expect justice to be served anyway?
No. Justice to be served? No. The reason is because this is obviously now justice can be served only if proper investigation is done. Any criminal justice process, the outcome depends a lot on the investigation. And if the investigation is wrong, if it goes wrong, if you get it wrong at the investigation level, the prosecution will be wrong, will be bad, and the conviction will be also similarly bad. And the reason is the quality of evidence that you gather in the process of investigation will determine the arguments that you present in the process of prosecution. And that will determine in the court's establishment of guilt and conviction. So the fact that the investigation is not being properly handled by a professional body, by a neutral body, by bringing in all the relevant bits of evidence, instead of going to find political culprits behind this fanfare, behind this incident, they should have done better by looking at the relevant evidence. For example, the words of Lamrot, the words of whoever has taken Hachalu from that spot to the hospital, the words of the medical doctors that have attended to him until he gives his last breath, the words of the doctors in the St. Paul Hospital, where his body finally was released to the public from. These are important bits of evidence that have to be looked into. And these have to be looked into because these are the relevant evidences, the relevant pieces of evidence. Instead of looking into these, we're looking for a witch hunt of political rivals to eliminate by using this as an excuse. And that is very, very tragic. Why is the government doing this? Now, this is the whole thing, the whole point. In my view, Hachalu was assassinated as a matter of political conspiracy. And once it has happened, the government wanted to make a political profit out of it. The government wanted to exploit the occasion to eliminate its opponents and to legitimize itself as in its action, in its crackdown on opposition political parties, and in a way to prepare the ground for a continuous rule by the Prosperity Party without any electoral mandate. So that's what they are trying to do, to justify any heavy-handed measure on their political oppositions. First the Oromo, then the TPLF, then whoever is in there. And that's what they are trying to do. So the fact that they are leaving out the real forensic evidence that has to do with the assassination, and the fact that they are on a political witch hunt for some people that they can relate to this crime, is basically an attempt to prepare the ground for attacks on political opposition leaders, which they have, most of which they have already arrested, and of course the TPLF remains to be out there, very much distant physically from the whole discussion here. So they would want to have an opportunity to occasion to take very drastic military measures on political opponents. And that's why they are really trying this on television rather than in the courtroom. And do we expect justice from the court? Well, from my experience of looking at Ethiopian courts and dealing with such sensitive political matters, when this happens, it ends up being a political trial. And a political trial is different from any ordinary trial because you know the guilt, you know the guilty party from before the guilt is pronounced. And a political trial is a political trial because you know the outcome, and the outcome is absolutely certain. You know it. It's not that you predict, but you know what the outcome would be. The suspect will be a criminal anyway. So that's what's happening now.
Yeah, some of the unexpected or rather unfortunate comments that are coming up after Hachalu's death and the protests that followed is that this is an ethnic issue or a religious issue. Why is a rally for justice being turned to an Amhara Oromo issue?
You see, for a long time now, since this change has come about in 2018, in September 2018, in late August and early September 2018, two things happened. First, Jawar Mohammed and the OMN went back to Ethiopia. And media freedom was very much there at that point in time, and all the banned and banished personalities, political personalities, media outlets, activists and journalists have been released from the prison, and those in exile were allowed to come in. So there was that moment of honeymoon, that moment of new winds of change blowing in the country. So in September, in August, Jawar and OMN went back home, and he had a magnificent reception, as you know. And then the OLF went back home. And then there is an extraordinary reception among the Oromo public in Finfinne. From that day on, there was a huge media and social media, both conventional and media campaign, saying that the OLF is a terrorist organization. It has to be stamped out of the country. Jawar Mohammed is another terrorist person who have to leave the country. OMN have to be closed, and so on and so forth. There was a repeated call, persistent call, that Jawar has to be killed, that OMN has to be closed, that OLF has to be proscribed as a terrorist organization, that the leadership must be imprisoned, that the country cannot be peaceful as long as these people are operating in that country, and so on. This is coming from the mainstream Amhara political elite, political class in the cities, and from the Amhara media outlets. And this call has been there for a long, long time. And in response to those calls, the Prime Minister has once attempted the assassination of Jawar Mohammed. And when that happened, they regretted that he escaped death, but they really called for more action on the part of the government to incriminate Jawar. And as you remember, after the assassination attempt on the Jawar's life, there was a lot of rally to protect him on one side, and there was a lot of action against his protectors on the other, both security personnel and from other groups, non-Oromo groups. And in that process, a number of people died, lots of properties were lost. And for those days, who did they blame? It was Jawar Mohammed. And Jawar had
he's
to
been
go
charged
on
with
media
that
spree.
also?
Yeah, he's not charged as a matter of criminal offense. But on the media, people were saying that he is responsible for that. It's because he said that the security personnel, his security cover has been removed, is about to be removed, and he resisted that. People came to be a shield for him, and people were killed as a consequence of that. And so the entire Amhara elite and the media establishment were saying that Jawar has to be held responsible for the deaths at that point in time. So the issue has been an Amhara Oromo issue because of that for a long time. Okay? Now when Hachalu was killed, it became an occasion to arrest Jawar, to close down the OMN Finfinne office, to go after OLF leadership, and to incriminate the Oromo public as bigoted nationalists that try to push out all other people from among them. That's how they are being portrayed now. This is their project, really. This has been there on social media, on media outlets, everywhere, every day. And what is happening is the same people who have been doing this, the same media outlets who have been doing this, are coming out to say that, A, we celebrate the moment of the arrest of Jawar Mohammed, the arrest of the OLF leaders, the closure of the OMN. They go crazy celebrating that happening. They also are celebrating the fact that Hachalu was assassinated, because some of them were obviously saying that he has tried to print Menelik, Emperor Menelik in black. He was saying that he is the guy who came on a donkey's back and stole away an Oromo horse, and there is this sculptor, this huge statue built in honor of Emperor Menelik in one of the squares in Addis Ababa, in Finfinne. And people have always joked about the horse in the statue and Menelik. And the horse is said to be taken away from an Oromo guy. And that was the kind of conversation he was having with Guyo Wariu. And immediately after that interview, there were many, many Amhara people, persons, who, at least who speak in the name of the Amhara anyway, who have been saying that Hachalu has to be killed and he will be killed. And they celebrate all these things. And now when the Oromos are protesting the arrest of Jawar Mohammed, the killing of Hachalu, and so on and so forth, there is an entire Amhara activist group globally protesting against this Oromo protest, both internationally and domestically. And in fact, they are saying now, very much to their script, they are saying that the Oromos are bigoted nationalists, tribalists that have perpetrated a genocide on other peoples who are living amidst of them. That is what makes it an Amhara-Oromo tension. And the government is not helping it. He is saying that the forces he has these dark forces that he imagines. And of course, Egypt is behind this, and TPLF is behind this, OLF is behind this. And he says they are inciting a communal violence. And everybody was saying that the Oromo are a barbarous, savage people who are perpetrating genocide on the Amhara. And this is the kind of narrative that they are releasing. And as you know, that they have called for a global rally for tomorrow or Friday, where they are saying we will defend Abiy, we will defend our dam, and so on and so forth, but we also go after these Oromos who are genociders. And that's the narrative they want to keep. That's why you see all these tensions between Amharas and Oromos in the diaspora, trying to protest and counter-protest and so on and so forth. And also silencing the Oromo activists and prominent politicians and prominent voices by blocking their social media outlets, platforms, by
I understand yours
disabling
was blocked
social media.
also. Your Facebook and Jawar's Facebook
Yeah, my
account was
Facebook.
down. Is yours back?
Exactly. Mine is not back. It's, I think, disabled so far. And there is a suspicion that there is an Ethiopian person who is working in Facebook, who is basically targeting the Oromo activists, Facebook's popular Oromo activists and politicians' accounts to be closed and to be disabled. So there is also that coming up now. There is a huge campaign and counter campaign on that as well. And this is all a ploy to kind of link the assassination of Hachalu to an Oromo person, an Oromo organization, and link that further to Jawar and OMN, and criminalize everything that is Oromo, and silence people who speak in the name of and for the Oromo at a global level. And these are the reasons they are protesting. And of course, there are violences when the protests are happening in Ethiopia. There is a political rage and a legitimate anger among people who, A, feel betrayed by Abiy Ahmed, B, feel injured because of the assassination of Hachalu and the arrest of the political leaders and the closure of the OMN. Yes, there is an outrage, and that has led to a lot of destruction of properties. And in order to understand those, instead of understanding those destruction of properties and properly handling them through legal mechanisms, now they are saying that these are genociders. Oromos are barbaric, savages, killing other people who are living amidst of them. And that's how they are trying to portray us. And by the way, this very much goes with the historical narratives that the Amhara elite has been projecting about the Oromo. The Oromo historically has been the pagan other in the Christian kingdom that Ethiopia was. The Oromo has been the primitive other in the socialist dispensation that Ethiopia was between 1974 and 1991. The Oromo was the oppressed other, the peripheral other, the marginal other, to be liberated, to be emancipated, to be centered, waiting to be emancipated and centered during the TPLF dispensation. The Oromo was the terrorist other in the year 2000 and since. The terrorist other. That was why our identity was securitized. That was why being an Oromo, Oromumma is still kind of a threatening language around Amhara political circles. And Oromo identity, Oromo-ness was securitized for years, especially since the time of the September 11 and after. And this is very much about the narrative framework, the narrative structure in which Oromo is presented as the barbaric, savage, pagan, underdeveloped, primitive, oppressed, and finally terrorist other. That is what informs the current political altercation. That is what guides the Amhara political elites' counter-protest and counter-campaign against the Oromo.
Most people who live outside Ethiopia and who do not understand the Ethiopian politics really wonder why always the political issue is shifted to an ethnic issue or a religious issue. Like, there's been a lot of blame flying around, like the government blaming people for protesting, the government blaming people for a lot of things. People are being blamed for the struggle. People are being blamed for being murdered, And the destruction of property, of course, it's very unfortunate for the things that have happened in the country. It's quite unfortunate, but the blame is crazy, from the prime minister to different media outlets. And you just said there's this fear of Oromuma, there's this fear of the character of an Oromo or a person of an Oromo, and that an Oromo is being classified as an uncivilized, person, a person that is not worthy of the Ethiopianness that people expect. How can this fear be dispelled? Because most of us want unity. We want people to live in peace. We want people to live side by side as brothers. No one is actually campaigning for an ethnic violence or religious violence in Ethiopia, which I don't believe is there. This Standard wrote an article yesterday, and it was trending all over Twitter for them saying people who are living inside Oromia. The headline was excessive use of force by the government, which whatever happened in Oromia. But the body of the story speaks a whole different thing, and first-hand accounts or anecdotes of people who were affected by the violence that erupted after Alu's murder. And it was very selective, and some people even named it biased because it only told one side of the story. Yet the police, the commissioner released statistics of the number of people that lost their lives following that incident, and Oromos were, of course, top of the list, over 166, which is now 200, and the other people, it was a little bit less. No life deserves, to be lost due to, or no one deserves to die. We're not saying anyone's life is important than the other person, but how can this fear be dispelled from people who think Oromos are savages?
Well, it's all these things emanate from the very fractured foundation of the Ethiopian polity as a polity. It's fractured because there is no fundamental consensus on the nature of the state and the relationship between the state and its societies, because there are a number of nations in that country. There is an uneven relationship among them. There is a historically ranked relationship among them. There is an equality yet to be achieved. There is a justice yet to be achieved. In fact, ethno-national justice that is yet to be achieved. And it is this fracture, this lack of justice, this fundamentally embedded injustice in the essential structure of the Ethiopian state that creates this fear, this suspicion, this misunderstanding, and some misguided narrative projections. I say this because this was once upon a time an empire. At least since the 19th century, Abyssinia's march to the south was an imperial march. And in the south, the state-society relationship is different from the state-society relationship in the old Abyssinian core. The state-society relationship in the non-Abyssinian core was a relationship of a settler colonial group who settles in the city and owns the land and the people to serve them. Every time politics is spoken out in the south of the lands that is south of the Nile in Ethiopia, it naturally is defined in terms of ethnicity. And that's why the most prominent political question in Ethiopia is called the national question. And the reason we have, you called it ethnic federalism, and its detractors call it ethnic federalism, the multinational federalism, is an attempt to transform that empire into a democratic republic of equals. What it doesn't say, but what it actually does in this constitution, is that it tries to transform the country from an empire to a modern democratic republic through a decolonizing structure named the right of collective groups to self-determination. The self-determination clause in the constitution is basically a decolonizing structure. And that is still a debating point. The federal structure, the federal arrangement, the fact that there is that decolonizing structure, that self-determination clause in the constitution is a bone of contention in Ethiopia today. Why is that happening there? Because the North considers that the existence of that article, the existence of Article 39, the self-determination clause, is a prelude to the dismemberment of Ethiopia. And the fact that, and from the South, that article is a guarantee for their equality, for recognition as proud ethnic groups in that country, and a guarantee to co-equal ownership of the country and the state. So this is the dividing line then. There is a historical fracture, there is an uneven relationship between groups in that country, and that even relationship, an uneven relationship is characterized as the national operation matter, and the question is presented as a national question. The way to address it is through a multinational federalism, which also recognizes the right to self-determination. Now, Ethiopia's state, which remains to be an empire still in substance, irrespective of the form, the Ethiopian state is haunted by the specter, as I say, of self-determination, the specter of ethnic groups to the right to self-determination. It is haunted, and self-determination, Article 39, has this spectral presence, which what I call the Amhara elite's anxiety about dismemberment. But in actual fact, what they are anxious about is the loss of privilege. What they are anxious about is the transformation of the empire. The reason they always try to counteract Article 39, multi-ethnic federalism, and so on and so forth, is because they want to keep the empire as it is, and they want to maintain the privileged position that they had in that part. Now, the spectral presence of Article 39 is basically the presence of a decolonizing structure that helps transform the country from an empire to a federal democratic republic. And that is where the anxiety comes from. Now, what is the way to forward to transform this empire to a working democratic federal system that also does away with or addresses this Amhara elite's political anxiety of dismemberment, that all these nations and nationalities are here, and if their rights is respected, if their rights are respected, then the country will be destroyed, or the territorial integrity of the country will be destabilized, and so on and so forth. Why is this happening, and how do we alloy this fear, this anxiety? Now, when fear is irrational, there is nothing you can do about it to alloy it. There is nothing you can do about it. But if you want to address the legitimate fears, and if you can communicate to one another the spectral presence of Article 39 and the right of ethnic groups, the rising interest of nations to govern themselves in the country, in the federation, if that is making you uncomfortable, then look at yourself. But that is basically an attempt to redeem the polity and to have a part in it, to own it, and to transform the state as one that also works for everybody, rather than as one that works for some, for few, for the privilege of the people, the people who have privilege from the past. Now, so at least the rational fears can be counteracted through healing the fractured beginnings, the fractured foundation of the polity, through transformation of the empire into a working, healthy, democratic federal system. Now, the fear, some of it is irrational, because the fear is basically a fear of dismantling the empire and replacing it with a transformed federal polity. And that fear we can't do about it. Yeah, I mean, there is nothing one can do about that fear, because that's an irrational fear. It's a phobic kind of thing that can only be overcome by succeeding and assuring them that this is not what is going to happen, that this country is not going to be dismembered because of the achievement of one's place in the world, achievement of one's place in the country, achievement of one's dignity and existence, as the motto we talked about at the beginning says. Accept or recognize my existence or expect my resistance. And so, to the extent that you do not recognize the nation's existence, you will have a resistance, and that resistance might cause fear in you, and that's sad. So, and this is the only way. If you value the other's existence in that polity and their rightful place in that country, then your fear will be alloyed. Otherwise, if you do not recognize their existence, and if you think the country belongs only to you and it should look like only you, then how can you live without fear? Because you are basically imposing an empire that that's not willing to be transformed, that's not willing to make a space for all these groups. And the fact that that empire is to be dismantled is something that really creates an anxiety on you, and you don't have to. You have to let go of, and my message is, let go of the empire. Let the nations have their justice, and let us have a country that we all own together, that we call our own home, our own state. And if you don't do that, you will live with the burden of fear, and we will continue to resist. And that's what the kids were saying.
That issue is now very, very clear for anyone who had a doubt or fear. Now they can deal with it. So the other thing is, there's been this ongoing market boycott across Oromia. This is the 5th day. So what do you think this is aimed at, and what are the demands of this boycott?
The protest was called immediately after the assassination of Hachalu and the arrest of the political leaders and the closure of the OMN. And this was called by the Qeerroo Oromia, and it has got two things it wanted to do. The first and foremost, it wanted to make a statement that Qeerroo Oromia is not going to sit down and see as Jawar is dragged into, they consider him as their leader, by the way, and as Jawar is dragged into the jail, and all the political leaders are gone, and they see that everything that is happening around them is an affront to the Oromo nation. And they are saying, we're not, and Jawar actually came to this country trusting God, and we, his people, are not going to sit back and see that he is being a victim of a political conspiracy on the part of the government. So it was a statement of mourning in such a way, in a way, mourning for Hachalu and seeking justice for Hachalu, for a dignified burial for him. Okay. And secondly, it was a statement to say that we are with Jawar, we are with our political leaders, we are with our organizations, to make a statement that OMN, our voice, is closed unjustly, and we are here for OMN too, the free media. All right. And they wanted to make a statement, and they called for a boycott. It wasn't really a boycott that they called for. They proclaimed the closure of the city. The roads will be closed, and movement of goods, people, and services to the city will be blocked for some of the specific demands, to address some of the specific demands they put out, and I will go into them in a moment. So they wanted to put pressure on Abiy's government to meet, or at least address in some ways, some of the specific demands they put out after making the political statement that they are with the OMN, with Jawar, with the Oromo political leadership, with Hachalu, and so on and so forth. So the first thing they called for is the closure of the movement, the blocking of the movement of goods, people, and services to the city and out of the city to the regions, the Finfine, that is. Secondly, they also wanted, in fact, in the press release that was out in the call for protest, they also said that there will be an interruption of utilities and services like water that goes from Oromia, electric power that all goes from Oromia, and so on. All this, we want to do it to put pressure on the government so that they can address our specific demands. What were the demands? And first and foremost, of course, they were demanding justice for Hachalu. They were saying that a free, independent, objective investigation has to be made, has to be done, and that has to be transparently communicated to the public. The perpetrators, the actual perpetrators of the assassination have to be held responsible. The victims, not just of people who were killed during and after Hachalu's assassination, particularly his family members and many other people, all those must be properly compensated, properly apologized to by the government or whoever is responsible. And so that's number one. That's demand for that's the demand number one, demand for justice for Hachalu. The second is the release of Oromo political prisoners and all other political prisoners that have been put in jail subsequent to, and even earlier than this, but subsequent to the assassination of Hachalu. This includes Jawar, this includes Bakkala Garba, this includes prominent political leaders of the OLF, such as Dr. Shigut Galata, Ken Sayana, Mikhail Borana, Abdi Ragasa, and a host of other people. So the second is release political prisoners. That was the second demand. The third demand was free the OMN, the OMN Finfinne, and release the journalists and the staff of OMN who are arrested subsequent to the assassination of Hachalu. Because the OMN is very important. It's a national resistance media. It's a symbol of media presence for the Oromo. In the mediascape of Ethiopia, the OMN was a phenomenon, as you know, because the Oromo voice was a voice from the margin, a voice that is either subordinated to all other narratives or excluded from the narrative. The Oromia Media Network's presence was an attempt to make sure that the Oromo voice is heard, Oromo voice is present in the mediascape. And the fact that the Abiy's government is attacking that important institution, that very, very important institution, by closing it, by raiding it, and by closing it, is an affront on the nation. And if they want peace, then justice for OMN. If they want peace, free OMN is the demand. Fourthly, there is another demand, I think. The fact that there is the military that is going abroad, in all over Oromia, and the heavy military presence must be cut down, and the military has to be removed from all corners of the country, the region, and get back to its barrack. Because that is becoming a terror to our people. We can't have a daily life. And, earlier to this assassination already, the military has been doing all sorts of atrocities in the region. And we have talked about this. You have talked to Trevor Truman last week. We have been looking at the Amnesty International's report a few weeks ago, and so on and so forth. There is a huge atrocity, and that was perpetrated by the military, by the special forces, by the regional police, and so on and so forth. So those things must stop, is the question now. Must stop, and the military must be removed from the civilian lives area. And finally, they want a proper negotiation to bring democracy back on the table, the issue of election and so on and so forth. Proper, inclusive, comprehensive renegotiation with the regime. In fact, what comes first before all this, if you see the slogans, is that Abiy must go. Abiy must either resign, must leave, must be replaced, must be removed. That is also everywhere. And in fact, you have seen this in the demonstrations across the world and across the country, saying down, down, Abiy, and so on and so forth. So these are the demands. And they wanted to stage this protest, and boycott included, to press the government to address these demands. And what happened, as you know, is that in many places the shops were closed, and of course the military was trying to open the shops by force, and they are on an mass arrest spree, and people are resisting. And for 5 days that has happened, and already there is a high price rise in the city on goods and basic needs, necessary edible resources. But yeah, there is a lot of pressure put on the government and on the society at large. And yesterday, I think it came to an end. The first round of protest rally has been brought to an end yesterday, and the Cairo Oromia has claimed victory by what it achieved so far. And they have now, I think, they are now regrouping to issue another mode of protest, and that's what they said yesterday evening. So today, I haven't yet checked what is in for today, but they have said that they will issue new calls for protest on a new ground and an intensified mode, and I think that's going to continue to be seen in the days to come. On the part of the government
about the achievements of the ongoing protest. You've seen protests all over the world, and in the diaspora especially, and there's a team of Oromos working tirelessly day and night just to make sure that these protests are a success. I was to ask you the successes of this protest, but move on to my next question, which is now that the elections were postponed indefinitely due to COVID-19, is there a possibility for the Prime Minister to stay in power without being contested?
Yes, let me first talk a bit about the success of the protest.
Yeah.
The protest was a statement. As I said, it's a statement that they are not going, the Cairo Oromia are not going to sit down and to sit back and see that their iconic cultural icon, Hachalu Hundessa, is taken away unjustly, that Jawar is imprisoned, that political institutions, political parties are under attack, that OMN is closed. So that statement has been sent through very well. That message has gone out and has impacted the nation as well as the world. So there is a protest, and the protest is a statement, a reaction to what happened. There was, according to the Cairo Oromia, a war has been waged on the Oromo nation, and we are resisting. Hence that motto, you accept my existence or expect my resistance, and resistance has been shown. Now, the second achievement, of course, is the fact that they put pressure on the government, that transports have been disrupted, that activities have been slowed down, that the movement of goods and services and people has slowed down, that as a result there is a high price rise in the country, that in itself puts pressure on the economic health of the country, and that puts pressure on the government to buckle down and to begin a negotiation, first to stop the violence on the people, and secondly to get down and start negotiation anew about the democratic future of that country. So in that sense, in Ethiopia, the protest of the 5 days have been successful, and their success will be seen more and more in the days to come as they continue to mount the pressure on the government by using different other tactics of protest. Now, the protest in the diaspora is basically a PR exercise. It is, first of all, it is a solidarity protest. It is a protest called to stand in solidarity with Cairo Oromia, with the Oromo people. And also, in a way, it's also an expression of condolences. It's an expression of mourning for Hachalu and mourning for a century-old plight in that country. And it's a very traumatized nation, as you know. The Oromo have been wounded for a long time. Just a few years ago, you remember the Irecha massacre, and there have been killing and displacement and eviction and harassment, and being banished into exile has become a way of life for Oromo. And especially in the Oromo diaspora, this is felt acutely. And every time the tragedy strikes in Oromia, they feel wounded doubly. First, personally because they are, as members of the diaspora community, they are children of suffering. A very famous migration law expert or a diaspora studies expert calls that the diaspora are children of suffering. And because of this identity that the diaspora Oromo community have, they feel very, very acutely. They feel the pain very sensitively. And so the protest in the outside world is a protest of solidarity. They are saying, we stand with them. We are here for them. The fact that internet is blocked, the fact that if freedom of information is at the moment blocked, the fact that press, that there is an information blackout does not make you stand alone. We hear you, we stand with you, we try to make your voice heard, we will try to make your story visible to the external world. And that's one of the things that they have done. And I think that message too, this message of solidarity, the message of condolence, the message of pain and mourning our suffering, that has been sent out, and in that sense it is successful. However, there is more to be done, more in the realm of lobbying and advocacy and resource mobilization to empower people who are victims of the violence, people who have been rendered homeless, people who have been arrested and whose whereabouts are not yet known. And there are a huge number of people who need help, and there needs to be resource mobilization across the world in the diaspora. That has to be done, and that continues to be done. Secondly, lobby and advocacy work has to be done by the diaspora community. This has to be done also in the diplomatic centers, in the United Nations, international NGOs, in the embassies, and in the countries that they call second home. They have to appeal to the governments of the countries they live in to put pressure on the government in Ethiopia to buckle down and start renegotiating, recast the whole political project of democratization, reset the whole effort, and go back to the drawing board to correct what has to be corrected and go on to the election that is necessary. That's the hallmark of any democratic transition in the country. Now, without the election, will Abiy Ahmed continue? Obviously, he can't. And one of the reasons they are attacking Hachalu Hundessa, one of the reasons they have attacked Jawar Mohammed and all other political leaders. And by the way, it's not just the Oromos that are arrested. And if you look at the profile of the people who are arrested from the other groups also, Ludetu Ayyaleo, Iskandar Nagga, Engineer Yilkal, these people have been very critical of Abiy and critical of him in particular because he postponed the election. And they have been saying, and almost in the same kind of language with Jawar, after the end of September in 2020, come September, this regime has no legal ground based on which it can call itself a government. So by the end of September, there will be no legally acceptable constitutional government. And in fact, the Prime Minister make a point of this when he came to the Parliament and tried to deride those people who have been saying that after September there will be no government. And in fact, we notice now that the attack on all the political leaders that were arrested so far, it was an attack, a reprisal for making that statement saying the postponement of the election was illegal, unconstitutional, and the extension of power, the extension of term of office after that, without any democratic mandate, is illegal. And all those people who have said this have been now put to jail. So will Abiy Ahmed continue in power after September, now that the election is postponed? Well, that's his intent. He has made this intent clear, and he has in fact tried to create a legal cover for this by asking the House of Federation to interpret the Constitution to extend the term of office. But unfortunately, none of the political parties have accepted it, not the House of Federation itself. The Speaker of the House of Federation resigned because of this, and not a single person in the populace, the Ethiopian public, accepted it, and we are stuck now. In the absence of acceptance at any level, at a political level, at a legal institutional level, and at an individual public level makes his position very, very implausible unless he becomes an outright dictator who rules by the fiat of his will and the might of his military. But the protest that you see now, that which says that you don't accept our existence, we mount our resistance. That call will probably make him uncomfortable to the very end, and probably that call will spell his end.
Thank you so very much. But because of time, I want to wrap this up. But one final question. You just mentioned there's heavy military presence in different regions of Oromia, and the military has been harassing people, jailing people, forcing people to reopen their businesses. And the question many are asking is the Nobel Peace Laureate giving up on peace? Briefly, enlighten us.
The Nobel Peace Laureate has never been a peacemaker. And by the way, that was a very, very big mistake in the first place. There was no peace that he made. The country he was inaugurated into, at the moment of his inauguration, Oromia region has been, in Oromia region, there was a strife, and they call it ethnic communal violence, etc. But there was a fabricated attack on all areas of Oromia. And there was a displacement of about close to 2 million people. The peace that he was awarded the Peace Prize for is said to be the peace deal he made with Eritrea. But there wasn't any deal at all. No one knows exactly the content of that peace deal. It was only a political tact to rally Isaias, president of Eritrea, against Abiy's rivals in Tigray, the TPLF, and that was the whole. That's the whole deal. In actual fact, what was the point of difference with Eritrea for many years since the time of Meles? The point of difference was the issue of demarcation. After the decision of the Hague Court about the arbitration court about the boundary, Badme, the point of contention, the border dispute, that spot was said to be belonging to Eritrea. But then demarcation was to happen. And for demarcation, Eritrea wanted it now, and Ethiopia said we have to negotiate. The reason we have to negotiate is, in the course of the demarcation, we should not separate families, churches, and so on and so forth. We need to sit down and negotiate that before we actually demarcate. The delimitation on the map is there, but the demarcation has to happen on the ground. And when we do that, we have to negotiate and collaborate and agree. And Eritrea did not accept it. The result is that now that the decision is made for me, I'm going to take over by military presence. So that was unacceptable. UNMI, United Nations mission between Eritrea and Ethiopia, has to be deployed there. And for a long time, it was a no war, no peace situation. And then UNMI also left, and there was always a kind of confrontation. But they didn't go to war, both of them, because they weren't able to run a war. So there was just a no peace, no war kind of situation. What happened when Abiy came? Abiy said, I will open the border. But did he demarcate it? No. Is there any negotiation, any agreement about the steps to be taken to demarcate the boundary? No. So what was the peace deal about? Nothing. It was just a political gesture of alliance between Isaias of Eritrea and Abiy of Ethiopia against the TPLF. That was basically the deal. But the international community took that as a peace process. And by the way, the boundary was open for about days or probably a month. And then there was a huge flow of people and goods, but then it was closed. Why was it closed? We don't know. What was the content of the deal? We don't know. And that was why we said at the very start that the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, was premature. It was made too early and without making necessary judgment. But of course, all these kinds of deals, all these kinds of prizes are decided elsewhere in the elsewhere, because I mean, America was behind it. Trump says, I am the one who is responsible for making him Peace Prize winner, and so on and so forth. Trump actually claims the Nobel Peace Prize for himself, but he actually, and so on and so forth. So it looks like it was done somewhere, the decision was made somewhere else, but it has nothing to do with peace, because from the day Abiy set his foot in the palace, Ethiopia has been in the midst of a war, and a war that has no abating until now.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure having you. Of course, we have a lot of questions, but we will create another time to discuss the complex situation of Ethiopia. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Asli, for having me.
Thank you. And thank you so much to my incredible technical team, my editor, Roba, and of course you for joining us and for keeping it OM. And for more credible news, keep it here. My name is Asli Gelgalo. See you tomorrow.